Hey everyone, welcome back. We are talking about the commerce power. I've got one more commerce power case we want to go over, and that's Gonzales versus Raich. Now we're going to get a little bit dicier here. Talk about some things. We're talking about drugs here, marijuana in particular, and how that can affect the commerce power. So get ready. It's going to be pretty exciting. So again, commerce power. You'll remember from our last discussion that commerce power is about the federal government's ability to regulate commerce between states, okay? And we looked at Bibb versus Navajo Freight, and we could see where when one state enacts a law that makes it harder for commerce to travel through the state, that's something where the federal government could come in and stop it and say, this is, enact a law that regulates that, okay? So now we have something very different in the Gonzales versus Raich case. Now we have two individuals, and I always like to look at who the people are. You've got Diane Monson and Angel Raich. And Angel Raich is, in particular, is suffering from cancer, and she's using marijuana medicinally to help with the pain. It has a significant impact for her that she wants to use it. Diane Monson is using it for, I believe, a back injury or something, but again, both medicinally, finding a medicinal purpose for it. Now, what's the way these two individuals are acquiring their marijuana is what's so interesting about this case, right? Because one of them is, probably just going out and buying it from the neighborhood kid. I mean, she's acquiring it somewhere locally, right? She's not going anywhere to get it. She's buying it, but buying it nearby. The other is growing it in her house. She's probably got the grow lights upstairs in the attic, And so in both of these cases, the federal government comes in and busts them and takes their marijuana stash and takes the marijuana plants and the grow lights and all of this. And so they cry, this is running afoul of the Constitution, right? You can't do this. You can't come in. The federal government, the DEA, they're claiming, cannot come in and regulate what they're doing under the commerce power, but it's the feds coming into California. They're both based in California. Feds coming into California to regulate this. That's improper. Okay. Now, could the California law enforcement agencies do something about it? Absolutely, but they've chosen not to, and the feds have decided that this is important enough to them. So, the feds come and claim we can regulate it because of the commerce power, and we can regulate anything that substantially affects interstate trade. So the question here is, how does this affect interstate trade, right? Because no one's going across state lines. No one's importing it significantly. I mean, we have one who's maybe buying it from the local kid. We have one who's growing it in her own home. Okay, how is that interstate trade at all? This is the challenge. So they're not crossing state lines, but what's curious and interesting about the commerce power is that it affords the federal government a significant amount of ability to do what they want to do in enforcing the laws that they want to enforce. So pretty much whatever you want to get to, the federal government's going to find a way to get to it. That's the moral of the story here. In this case, the feds said, there was a case you read about within the case where it talked about a wheat farm. And this wheat farm, it's a famous constitutional case involving the commerce power. There's a wheat farm that grows its own wheat and starts consuming it. They're baking their own bread on their family farm. Okay, and the feds come in and regulate that. And this is a time when you were required to sell your wheat to the local regional wheat market. Okay, the feds came in and said your personal consumption of that wheat to bake your own bread is taking a little bit out of what would be required to go to the regional wheat market, which then affects the amount of wheat, even slightly, it affects the amount of wheat on the national interstate scale. And you're affecting it slightly, so you are affecting it, right? It's like kind of like the butterfly wings flapping. You are having, this butterfly flaps its wings in South America, affects a tornado somewhere else. I mean, that's it's a stretch, but they're claiming it. They're saying Also, if everyone decided to do this and they decided to keep their own wheat and bake their own bread, well, then we would have this incredible effect on the interstate wheat market. And so, even though you're affecting a very, very slight amount, you are still affecting, and the federal government claims it can regulate that. Same thing is happening here. They are saying, even though that marijuana is an illegal market, you're not supposed to buy and sell it, there is an interstate market, and your consumption of it, growing it, means that there's it affects the interstate market for marijuana because someone doesn't have to go and buy more, right? You're growing it, not buying it. And if you're buying it, you are bringing, like Diana's doing, you're bringing more marijuana into the state and creating a greater market for trafficking of it. So again, it's hard to wrap your head around this because it's so small. And again, we have what's an illegal market and shouldn't exist, but it is affecting. Even very slightly, it's affecting interstate commerce, and the federal government can sink its teeth in and come in and regulate this. You might ask, how come Colorado is getting away with it and the federal government is not regulating, not coming into Colorado? Well, we give, the federal government could, if they wanted to, come in and regulate the marijuana market. It is still a Schedule I drug that is illegal, and technically these Colorado marijuana shops are in violation of federal law. But the feds have decided, hey, we're going to look the other way. We are not going to regulate it. We're going to let the state of Colorado try this experiment and see what it wants to do, see how it works. Now, this is a little dicey coming into the new administration because you don't know what the Trump administration is going to do. Are they going to walk in and try to regulate the Colorado market? Are they going to let it sit there? We don't know. And what's also really interesting is that in Colorado, a lot of these marijuana companies, they're just stockpiling cash. Like, I understand if you go into these shops, you're going to have to pay in cash because they don't want to get involved with the credit card companies because the credit card transaction, right, happens somewhere probably not in Colorado. It's going over the telecommunications lines, and you're potentially at risk for wire fraud because it's illegal. That money could be seized in another state by the federal government just because it's looking away in Colorado. Well, if that transaction happens in Minnesota, where the bank is located at U.S. Bank's headquarters, well then the feds could say, hey, that money was to the purchase of marijuana. The transaction was made in Minnesota. Let's go in and take that cash. So these marijuana companies that have grown up and started in Colorado are ending up stockpiling all this cash and having armed guards that are guarding all their cash so they don't know what to do with it because no interstate bank is willing to take the risk of trying to accept and hold that cash for people because it doesn't just stay in Colorado. You accept the cash at the bank, and it's essentially digital, and it exists, across the United States. And so there's a place where a way that interstate trade, is you can see the kind of interplay between these two things, the push and pull. Here's what I want you to know: for a commerce power, the government can control. Talking about the feds here. The feds can control the channels of IC, of interstate commerce, right? So the ways that it is getting there. So think of like it can control the telecommunications industry. If you're using telecommunications, if you're using the interstate highway system, right? If you're using rail or canals, these are channels that interstate commerce travels down, okay? The government can regulate them, okay? It can regulate, it can control the instrumentalities. Think about like that mud flap case. I mean, that's sort of an instrumentality of interstate commerce. We're not just affecting the roads, we're affecting the vehicles and the things that travel on those roads. The government can control that and can regulate it. And then finally, the activities that substantially affect interstate commerce, okay? That's our marijuana case. That's our our wheat farmers that are growing the wheat and retaining it themselves, that they are substantially affected. Their activity is substantially affecting interstate commerce. So know that those three things, it's the channels, instrumentalities, and activities, and if they involve interstate commerce, the federal government has the ability to regulate them. Sometimes this hurts business because it creates regulation, but sometimes it helps business because it prevents states from discriminating, like we saw in the Illinois with the mud flaps. That would have been bad for shipping companies. The moral of this is really that the government can regulate anything that it wants to. I mean, especially with this activities. I mean, if it wants to get there, it can find a way to do it, because it can say just about anything affects interstate commerce on some level. And so you want to think about how your business could be potentially impacted by interstate commerce. You don't bump up against the commerce power a lot, but it does give the federal government a lot of ability to control things.